I'd like to call the meeting back to order. We'll begin our meeting with acknowledgement of the land. I'd like to say that I was at a school opening recently, and the little girl that did the acknowledgement does it way better than I do. I wish I had a recording of her that we could play at the beginning of every meeting. We would like to acknowledge the traditional territories and oral practices of the Blackfoot Nation, which includes the Siksika, the Piikani, and the Kainai. We also acknowledge the Tsuut'ina and Stoney Nakoda First Nations, Métis Nation Region 3, and all people who make their homes in 37 regions. I would also like to take this opportunity to welcome all of our staff and public in attendance. Representing our stakeholder groups, I would like to recognize Kevin Kemp from the Local 38, Lois Robb from the CBE Staff Association. I would also like to recognize two of our principals, Andrea Taylor and Janice Fridge. Thank you very much for joining. We are also very pleased to welcome the grade 6 students from Mayland Heights School, their teacher Miss Perry and Ms. Tutkaluk. Students have moved their classroom to the historical Dr. Carl Safran building. Their week has them investigating the question, how does diverse thinking change? They will be exploring the role that mindfulness plays in influencing well-being and how decisions are made for the common good in public education by the city. About that today. They met with Acting Deputy Chief Jeannie Everett this morning and will meet with Trustee Dennis. You could all stand up, give a little wave at the camera. We're very happy to have you here. So the first item of business is to approve the agenda for today's meeting. Ms. Miner, do you have any changes that need to be made?
Madam Chair, the following agenda changes have been received. And
Ms. Miner, could I have a motion that the agenda be approved as with the proposed change? Thank you, Trustee Adams. All those in favor? Unanimous. So as there are no awards or recognitions scheduled today, next on our agenda is a public comment from Ms. Dana Watson. I would ask Ms. Watson to come to the podium. Please ensure that your focus is on matters before the board today and refrain on the personal character or performance of individuals, department, or in accordance with. Please state your name, and then you have 3 minutes to address the board.
My name is Dana Watson. I'm a parent and member of 6 schools kindergarten. In 2016, our school had 10 refugees. You can only assume from this that the state has not taken this data into consideration or have raised the levels to meet the criteria or have lowered their commitment to meet students. In the 2 years the school has had the full-day program, registration for kindergarten has increased by about 10 students. With that has been an increase in volunteers. Attendance at council meetings has gone from 4 of us to up to 20. Every one of those additions are parents of a kindergarten student. This was vital in the ability to host a successful casino. The previous casino had little parent involvement and almost didn't happen. The volunteers for it were friends of school. With the money from holding a casino, we have been able to provide swimming lessons for every student, in-school science programs, athletic programs, and equipment for the music. Cutting full-day kindergarten will interfere in our ability to provide this funding. Having full-day kindergarten means parents can take advantage of the before and after school care and allows them to be employed or return, improving their ability to provide for their. My daughter started kindergarten before full day was implemented. At 10:30, a little 11:15, and then picked up again at 2. In order to manage that, my husband changed jobs to home. It came with a sickness we have yet to recover from. Lucky. Cutting full day kindergarten means an increased poverty. The neighborhood Catholic school has full-day kindergarten, and I've already heard from 2 parents that have decided to register their child there, not for religious reasons, but because their full-day program is not at risk. I believe if you take the program away, we will lose students, future students, and the funding that comes with those students. The CB knows all the benefits of this program, and they know we need it. What also needs to be considered is the horrible cost of taking it away. This proposed cut to full-day kindergarten for Marlborough School will cost the school funding and harm our student families. Do not approve this mistake, because we will lose everything we've gained. Last 2 years we had it. It's wrong for students, it's unfair to the school, and it's harmful to. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Watson, for taking time to thoughts with the next item of business is the annual monitoring of results for personal development. Last week, trustees had the opportunity to ask questions regarding the report and for the board to consider. Superintendent. Now the board's responsibility to report is evidence of progress in the results area. The board has previously approved the reasonable interpretation of results policy, that today our job is to determine whether or not the report evidence has made full progress towards achieving. So the portfolio of chief performance and the results have.
Thank you, Chair. The Board of Trustees, the monitoring report results of personal development and concludes that the Chief Superintendent has made reasonable progress towards the ultimate achievement of this results policy, with the exception of policy sub.
Thank you. Are there any questions regarding the motion? Would you like to open debate?
Sure. Every year, results 4 comes to us, personal development, and it really is an important result for us to be monitoring. It tells us how our kids are doing in regards to their resiliency, how well they're striving to meet goals and take risks, use feedback to impact their learning, of course, well-being. I believe we made reasonable progress in regards to this in most of the policy. We've seen that of the highest 12 survey measures that have multiple year data, this year's results were the highest, second highest in 9 of these measures. Of the other 3 measures, one measures 2016 to 2017 results. So we did drop a bit this year in the return rate for students, which I think caught some attention, but it's important to remember that 1 year could be a blip, it could be more. We will, as a board, however, be looking to that next year and see where we are in regards to that return rate. As I've said, I believe we made reasonable progress on the majority of this result, with the exception of 4.5. Indicator 3, that's the percentage of high school students who report they make decisions that contribute to their overall well-being as measured by student survey. We've seen a decline in this particular indicator over the last 3 years. When I'm in school, I talk to teachers, parents. This is an issue I often hear of, is around the well-being of this. So we know as adults, investing in our mental and physical and social and emotional well-being is really important for us to be productive as parents and as employees and as daughters and sons and as citizens. And of course, the same is true for kids. The more we can support our kids in understanding them, making their personal connection to themselves and knowing themselves and recognizing that well-being is important in all of these aspects, the better we are at making our kids successful. So I'm really looking forward to hearing others and their comments around this. Thank you.
Open. to the evidence, it's clear that reasonable progress by the standards that the program as trustees are for personal development. This is actually one of my favorite results policies. Hear a lot from our public and from employers in particular how important to be able to have personal problems, able to embrace ambiguity and complexity, and being able nowadays to be technologically fluent, ethically, something that is often in our society. Technology has, or how do we use these tools? They are fantastic tools that can lives of everyone in our world, but they must be used. When I look at the evidence that are indicating that we, regards to 4.5, that our evidence is not there. We do show that we're achieving success in health. But when we were asking them, is only that we've asked them, are you actually making these choices? Because with the Board of Trustees, we actually want to know what the outcome and know what choices they are actually making, are the lessons that they are learning about in those health classes and in those comm classes translated, and the results that we would like there. Province, worldwide, we are seeing that might be tied with the technology as well. Promotes good mental health.
Thank you, Chair Herdman. I too will support the motion. I think the data we provided, we are making progress in this. But the comments that I'm going to give will basically revolve around comments from our students. 3779 gives a little bit of, we talk a lot about knowledge. I get the feeling that this student has not only a great deal of knowledge, but certainly a fair amount of wisdom too, which I hope is the next step. At any rate, the comment that I'm referring to is student states, I then began to realize that life never turns out perfectly the way you want it to be, no matter how hard you try. That I think that's true and to other people too. But it was within the CBE school system I was also able to come to realization. The flexibility, self-directedness of my school, also aspects that I cherish deeply from it, as it has always given me positive. I think that's so significant. I think sometimes we get caught up in the data and we sometimes forget that this is a very personal experience, and each student will face it in their own way. And I think this student has captured something that at least myself as a trustee have to be continually aware of. So I will certainly be supporting the motion.
I found it really great with our students today singing Shakira, Try Everything, just so appropriate for what we're talking about today, and our kids. And it's really about giving them the confidence and the safe space and the opportunity to feel like they can try everything. And I think that that is something that is so critical for so many students who have so many barriers to be able to try something that for many of us seems like second nature. They're the tip of our fingers. So I appreciated that, and I appreciated the students and the learning that they're doing here around mindfulness and diversity, and I think that's wonderful. I will say I'm looking. I know that personal development it is a tough thing to monitor, and I know that the board is working and trying to find innovative and new ways in order to understand our kids. And I really do appreciate that work that's been done, because I would say not every school board does this. So I really value that. And I'm really looking forward to seeing the results next year around as we move forward with the survey and so forth. And I do like the fact that we are around the capacity and building capacity, that we're looking at new ways of creating inclusive environments where our kids feel like they can be themselves and do their best. And I'm looking forward to seeing how that all works out and what we learn from that.
And our agenda is operational expectations. Community.
Chair Herdman and trustees, we are pleased to present this monitoring report on communicating with the public to you. Communication with the public is an essential component of our business. Engaging with our stakeholders is a pillar of our Operational Expectation 9 speaks to the importance of building confidence in our public through. This involves both providing opportunity, feedback, and input, as well as the sharing of information in a timely manner. I would now like to ask Marla Martin-Esposito, Education Officer, to present this monitoring report to highlight further details.
Thank you, Chief Stevenson. Chair Herdman and trustees, I'm pleased to present the 2016-17 monitoring report, Operational Expectation 9, Community. Highlight that we're compliant in this report. The report highlights some of the daily work of community engagement, but in a system with more than 1,245 schools, lots of community that happens every day in our system. Every employee in some way is responsible for communicating with parents, with other employees, for the public on a wide range. Our job as a department is to provide schools and service units with the messaging, tools, and technology to ensure communication is consistent. And communications can help build public confidence by providing information that's honest and opportunity for dialogue. The department works collaboratively with service units, create a variety of communications that we share with. For the past few years, we've invested in communication processes and protocol to improve parents. Last year, as you know, marked the first full year that our schools had access to Messenger. Schools can send emails, phone messages, or texts. All parents or to a group of parents. They can send out as a department on behalf of the school, a group of schools, every parent in this, more than 160,000 emails in support schools and emergency communications such as lockdowns, community threats, fire. Send out system communications to all parents on other topics like potential had a positive impact on timely weekend. We've also worked hard as a system, reasonably include engagement framework called Dialogue, helps guide leaders them. As you noticed in this monitoring report, we've also highlighted some other ways we can
the report does list out. Those were some long lists. The operational expectations policies define the degree of authority. The Board of Trustees is We reviewed the reasonable interpretation and found them acceptable. I invite any trustee questions about the report to offer. Okay, well, I just had one question. On page 5-5, one of our indicators is from the accountability pillar survey that the province does for grades 4, 7, and 10 parents. And it shows that parental involvement is at 78.3%. So how does this compare to previous years? Is this trend upwards, downwards?
Chair Herdman, just looking at the past 5 years of data, the range is 77.2% up to 78.4%. All of those are in the intermediate category. The last 2 years, 2016 was 78.4, 2017 was 78.3, are approaching the upper range of the intermediate category, which ends at 78.5, so above 78.5 would move us into the high category.
So close. Any other questions from trustees? Trustee Dennis?
Around the same topic there, around the parent involvement. Do you have an idea of what demographics of parents maybe are choosing not to be involved? Right, so the percentages that aren't included, do we have any idea sort of the demographic at all? I'm just curious about, just some of our communities, if they are less likely to participate, do we encourage them to participate, and how we might do that?
Chair Herdman, to Trustee Dennis, I think any parent who can participate in their child's education in some way would want to, and all of our schools certainly encourage that, create as many opportunities for parents to be meaningfully as well involved as possible, but we don't have any breakdown of reasons why people would or wouldn't.
Trustee Adams?
Thank you. I'm just curious, when it comes to our communication, in particular school messenger, can parents opt, is there any language choices that they prefer to get messages in, or is it always in English and that's just how it works?
So I believe for School Messenger, it is primarily English, but I'm going to ask Daryl Delamont, our manager of digital communications, if once they receive that message, they can now choose a different language as part of the program.
Trustee, I'm sorry, was it Chair Herdman? To Trustee Adams, the School Messenger does offer the ability to translate into multiple languages through email. We're limited by the fact that in our SIS, we capture the student's home language, which is not necessarily the preferred language for communication, and it's only one language per student. So a mother and a father may prefer to get the same message in different languages. We don't have the information to know what those languages are, so we send all of the messages in English.
Any further questions? Okay, so any trustee who wishes to bring forward a motion regarding exceptions to finding the evidence to be compliant, or a motion of commendation for exceptional performance, should provide the corporate secretary and all trustees with the proposed motions by the end of day tomorrow, Wednesday, April 25th, 2018. And if there are no exceptions or commendations, then it will be placed on the consent agenda for the May 15th, 2018 board meeting, with the motion that the Board of Trustees approves that the Chief Superintendent is in compliance with the provisions of OE9 communicating with the public. So next on our agenda is item 7.1, impact of proposed amendments to board meeting procedures. Do trustees have any questions regarding this report? Trustee Davis.
So in the report, we look at the impacts of receiving documents earlier, and including the impact on the public having access to the agenda and the supporting documents as well. And just going back related to the OE9 that we just talked about, that strategic two-way dialogue, I know that in the report we discussed some of the negative implications of the information being available to the public and to the media earlier. And I'm just wondering if there are not some positive impacts as well that would result from this, especially as it relates to having that strategic two-way dialogue about important items like the budget.
Chair Herdman to Trustee Davis. I'm assuming you're asking administration that question versus other trustees, so I'm happy to respond. I think that this report has tried to identify both the positive and the concerns that might arise from these changes. I have no direct response to your particular question other than to say I would recognize, as been described here today, the more that we can include our stakeholders in two-way dialogue, the more productive and more confidence we have in our public has in our education system. I think that the ability to do that is currently there. We have the opportunity for parents to read the materials in advance. So what we are talking about is the amount of time that the information is available, not the fact that we would make it available.
Any further questions? Trustee Davis.
And so as we evaluate this information to determine, how we may move forward with it, I'm interested to know if the current request was relating to having information 2 weeks in advance. And would you be able to comment on whether the impacts would change if the timeline was changed to 10 days in advance?
Chair Herdman to Trustee Davis. Again, I don't believe that the issue of 14 days or 10 days would make a significant difference in the impacts. I think any change would require new procedures, would require some costs, would still eliminate some reports from actually being available in terms of the data for us to do it. So I don't see any significant difference between a 10-day or a 14-day, and I'm not sure if the 14-day, I don't believe there's a significant difference between that kind of timeline.
Trustee Hrdlicka.
Just a point of information, when we say, and maybe this is a Trustee Davis, when you say 14 days, you're talking about including weekends. When you say 10 days, are you talking about 10 business days? Or, I know I'm getting into semantics, but I just want to be clear on what you're referring to.
It would be 10 days, not 10 business days.
Trustee Bradshaw.
I just have a question for the chair, because you've been through a few of these cycles now. How are you finding it after 4 years, having the timeline we're currently on versus the proposed changes?
Well, I think a few years ago, the board made the decision to do a lot of action items or large monitoring reports over 2 meetings. So the first meeting, we can ask questions, and then we have another whole week or more to think about it, talk with constituents, and really come very prepared for that final debate. So I think that was a positive move in our board meeting procedures. And no disrespect to prior corporate secretaries, but we're actually receiving the materials on time now, according to our board procedures with this board, and in the past, that wasn't always the case. So I'm very happy with how we're getting it, and I realize that it does take a long time for new board members to get accustomed to getting into that rhythm of everything, and yeah. Any further questions? Okay, so we will move on with our agenda. The next item on our agenda is item 7.2, Education Matters, Presentation and Financial Statements, as at December 31st, 2017. So I'd like to ask Mike Shake, Board Chair, and Marilyn Field, Executive Director of Education Matters, to come forward to the podium.
There it is, yeah. Chair Ms. Herdman, trustees, superintendents, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. As the chair said, that my name is Mike Shake. I'm the proud chair of the Education Matters. And today with me is our executive director, Marilyn Field. She's going to join me in this presentation. And of course, we have our 3 board members or governors, Richard Hare, Lisa Davis, and of course, Greg Francis. Thank you very much for allowing us to give you our highlights for 2017. In 2003, the Education Matter was established by the trustees then and some of the community visionaries. Why? They wanted more for our students. Our trust indenture says we are established to engage in charitable activities and programs beneficial to the advancement and enhancement of public education. So, ladies and gentlemen, we at Education Matter, we breathe, we live, and we sleep with that goal. We want to facilitate the community engagement in and for public education to enrich and empower the students. Education Matter receives $660,000 of operating funds as approved by CBE trustees in 2013. We work to help with advancing the CBE 3-year business plan, or education plan, through sports for personalized learning and stakeholder engagement. And of course, the stakeholders, one of the stakeholders is, of course, yourself, being the CBE. We meet regularly with CBE to determine the priorities for our students, and we go out to raise money for that. Since 2013 to 2017, we have raised $7.9 million and distributed $6.6 million and have received from CBE $3.4 million. Donors contribute both endowment funds and flow-through funds, and I'll explain that. Endowment funds are invested by us, and from that, we take 4.5% of the capital available for distribution annually. Whereas the flow-through funds are donated and used in the same year or maybe in the next year. Since inception, we have raised $17 million in private donations from our community. Education Matters distribute funds via awards for students and grants to benefit CBE schools and programs to enrich student learning. To date, we have distributed $12 million. And you will ask me the difference between 17 and 2 million. I'll explain that for the accountants here. For 2017, we raised $1.8 million. That was a slow year for us because of the economic reasons. We distributed $1.5 million. About $1 million of that was shared among 54 schools and departments for educational programming, and 276 student awards were claimed in the amount of $475,000. Our grants have touched on many different strategic areas, including high school success, Indigenous learning and education, literacy and mathematics strategies, and of course, personalized learning. And vis-a-vis, I'm going to talk about the 17 versus the $15 million, and that is that we have an endowment fund of about $5.2 million, which we invest. And as I mentioned before, we take only 4.5% of that for our operational funding. At this time, I'm going to ask Marilyn Field to give you further highlights.
Thank you, Mike. Education Matters works with CBE administration to help determine the funding priorities. Some of the priorities have multi-year funding needs, others have high costs associated with them, but they're also scalable in nature, which is important for donors, while some have lower costs. We're very pleased with the success to date, and we'll continue to work with donors and the administration as we move forward. There's more information on the priorities in your package with the update report. In addition to the priority projects, we also provide grants to schools and departments through our fall granting process. Applications are reviewed and ranked by our grants committee that's comprised of community volunteers from various fields, including nonprofit, education, corporate, and the public sectors. Our grants are governed through our mandate and also these overarching granting parameters. We encourage innovation through educational enhancements. Our flexibility ensures that we can align both educational content and connections with student needs, so we can do things like providing food supports as well as educational supports. Short-term projects are important, and it's rare to find a donor who will provide consistent long-term funding for the same project. Sustainability plans must be built into the projects and the requests that we receive. No donor wants to provide funding on a project that will fade once their donated dollars stop. We're committed to helping all students. We do give special consideration to students who are disadvantaged or vulnerable, as they may not be afforded the same opportunities as their peers in more affluent environments. We give priority to system-wide initiatives. However, we understand schools understand their student population best, and they can understand the unique challenges, and therefore their support can help, or our support can help align with those personalized learning strategies. Donors understand too that a project that's successful in one school may be expanded to other schools, and this is very intriguing to them. We will fund capital equipment and technology as long as the need is wrapped around a program. It's not just for the sake of having that equipment. We've developed effective and well-developed effective programs are really important, as donors want evidence that their dollars are being used successfully for the desired impact. Some examples of our 2017 grants show a wide variety of funding areas, and these are but a few. In alignment with the 3-year education plan, you'll see connections to high school success with career exploration, Indigenous education supports through various projects, literacies, including languages and mathematics, and mental health and wellness with one program, A Unique View from the Inside, which you'll be able to see a little taste of at our event on May 9th. Also, food security and vulnerable student initiatives. Our granting is very complex, and there's a lot of gray areas. Funds have to be used for projects that align with the donor's interest. This is required by law. We work collaboratively with both donors and CBE to determine the best alignments for funding for the best projects. We distribute grants for students in every quadrant of the city, as well as for system-wide initiatives. Some projects include multiple schools and students, others are for specific schools. Student award administration is one of the services that we provide to CBE. Because of our experience with existing student awards and endowment funds, CBE administration agreed that it was more efficient for Education Matters to handle this area and to avoid duplicating the work. Providing student awards aligns perfectly with the strategic goals of lifelong learning and work preparation for high school success. And it's often of interest for donors and funding. The need for student awards increases every year as students realize the high cost of pursuing their further education and training. Our students are very fortunate to have these resources available to them. In conversations with school districts across the country, funding of this magnitude is not available for their specific students. To summarize, CBE and Education Matters have a very strong relationship excuse me, in working together to enhance student learning. We meet consistently, we're adaptable and responsive to new needs and opportunities. We pride ourselves with being nimble to work with donors. We collaborate with other education partners, such as nonprofits. Often we'll make collaborative requests for funding in the community. Listening to stakeholders is very important, and that's one way that we do it. The best example of our impact comes from the words of our closest stakeholders. We're able to show our positive outcomes through the success of students we serve. And I love that first one, by the way. Comments such as those on screen help a donor decision to support and fund CBE students.
So the work at the Education Matter we do is changing lives of students and empowering educators to be more innovative. Thank you for allowing us to make our presentation to you for 2017, and we'll open up for any question you may have. Before we do that, I have a small commercial to make. May 9th, May 9th, we have a Fuel the Future? Fuel the Future event right in this room, and I invite you all to come. That's my commercial.
Thank you very much for your presentation and for being here. Trustees, do you have any questions? Trustee Hare.
In your presentation, Mike, you mentioned Education Matters has been around since 2003. And looking back, Education Matters commenced their activities with pretty much a gala event at which the major guest was Barbara Bush, who unfortunately just passed away a couple days ago. But it was a very significant event. I was executive assistant with the AT at that time, and I and another member were attended, and I greatly appreciated it. And I greatly appreciated it because I spent about 20 minutes in a wonderful conversation with Peter Lougheed about the tremendous fact that in Alberta we had a very strong public school system which was open and accessible to all. And so I looked back to that conversation, and of course I realized that since that time, you know, many of our students do face challenges, and in many ways Education Matters has assisted in us overcoming those challenges. I'm sure you're well aware that funding for public schools is always difficult to get, and we do the best we can. But Mike, I think you guys are doing great work, and my question is, how better could we as a board help you to do even more?
Thank you for the question, Trustee Hare. That's a very good question, and I would like to give you the answer when we go out to donors and we ask for multi-year funding, we want to make sure that we have the continuity of the funds, right? Our donors need to have a confidence in us that Education Matter is sustainable over the years, right? So anything you could do to give us that comfort to our stakeholders or donors that the sustainability for Education Matter is there.
Trustee Davis?
It's never a good thing to go after Richard. I don't have his depth of knowledge on the history of the CB. Just a question though, if you just maybe touch a little bit on the process of how you establish the priorities, both with the CB and then also how that marries up with what the donors are looking for.
Sure, Chair Herdman to Trustee Davis. We work very collaboratively with CBE, and in fact, we meet monthly and talk about upcoming needs, requests, things like that. Of course, not every need is fundable, and not every need could we even go out to the community to fundraise for, obviously, for both, political reasons as well as donors. But we do meet, we review, we look at requests from CBE as a team. Then that process, once we've narrowed it down to what we think is the best process, also goes back to our board, and they vote on the proposed projects to see if, yes, this makes viable sense from a community perspective. We have potential for donations to come in to support that need. For example, we would not take transportation, for example, to our board because that we would not be able to fund for. But if it was transportation that was wrapped within a specific program need, then that could be included as a part. So we look at the whole of the project, we look at the sustainability there after the fact, because as I said, we don't do long-term funding because no funder can do that. And we want to make sure that there will be longevity in some form or some sort of impact of success that we can share donors so that we can continue to fundraise from them.
Any further questions? So you talked about two main parts. You talked about the student awards part of Education Matters and then the grants. And I'm just wondering kind of the ratio of how much time you spend on each, or resources or time, which takes more.
Very good question, Chair Herdman. We actually put more of our resources into the granting cycle. Because of the fact that student awards, if we wanted to just raise funds for student awards, we would even show more success than what we do because they are very, very intriguing for donors to contribute to. So we still ask for those things, but we don't do it in the same direct response that we do for granting. One of the reasons we do that is because of the fact that we'll get student awards come to us even if we don't ask. People will come to us and say, I want to do this, and we say, great, we're here to help. But we know the granting side is not as well known, and it's also more difficult to achieve. So therefore, we put more resources into that. Couldn't give you a percentage, it depends on the year. But we do, work-wise, as far as staff time, more will go into the student awards because of the sheer volume. 2,000 applications last year, that's a lot. And so to go through that and to also manage our committee who reviews those, that takes a lot of time. So we do put a lot of resources into that. However, we only have one staff member that's dedicated to that, student awards and grants. But for our overall resources that we use for funding and that type of thing, majority goes towards granting.
For numbers purposes, for the accountants here, we have $1.5 million last year, which we distributed, $1 million towards the grants, and $475,000 towards the awards.
Any further questions? Oh, well, thank you very much again for coming. So the next item on our agenda is 7.3, which is a motion arising from the budget assumptions report. So last week, trustees received the budget assumption report and had the opportunity to ask questions regarding the report. And Trustee Herdlicka, I understand you have a motion you'd like to bring forward.
Thank you, Chair Herdman. My motion is that the Board of Trustees directs the Chief Superintendent to use reserves to continue supporting full-day kindergarten in 16 schools for the 2018, 16 schools for the 2018-2019 school year.
Thank you. Trustee Dennis?
I would like to make a friendly amendment to that motion, that we add in the wording up to $1 million if needed.
Trustee Herdlicka, do you consider that a friendly amendment?
Just a point of information, just to confirm with the Chief Superintendent that there was for those 6 schools that we were going to no longer for this year be supporting with the program, that it was $1 million.
Chair Herdman to Trustee Herdlicka. I'm not an accountant, and it seems like numbers continually float, but my understanding was that the cost could actually reach $1.2 million, so there could be a slight shortfall.
So Trustee Dennis,
All right, so I will say then up to $1.2 million if needed.
Trustee Herdlicka, do you consider that to be a friendly amendment?
I do.
Okay. I anticipate that some trustees might have some questions before we actually start debate of this matter. So do any trustees have any questions, either for Trustee Herdlicka regarding the motion or to administration around full-day kindergarten and how we do that operationally? Trustee Bradshaw.
I guess my first question is kind of simple, maybe not. So why do we have reserves, I guess, for the Chief Super?
Why do we have reserves? Chair Herdman to Trustee Bradshaw. I'm sure there's an accounting reason why we have reserves. We have reserves to ensure that if unexpected events arise, or unexpected costs, or unexpected needs, that we are in a position to not fall into arrears. By law, we're not allowed to do that. And I can give you several examples if you want, and these are recent examples, but we have many examples that go beyond recent. So we have an influx of 500 refugees, and because of the single September 30 count date, no additional funds are available. These refugees that came to us had significant language needs, had significant social emotional needs, and we had to immediately put them into schools, provide teachers, additional support such as psychology, transportation. Without some kind of reserve fund, we would not have been able to do that. We have a budget that is a projection of costs as opposed to a certainty of costs. So it is very common business practice that an organization such as us ensures that we have the ability to respond to those kind of needs. Now, Superintendent Grundy may want to add to that, but that's simply one example of how come we have needs. In this organization, we have certainly reduced the amount of reserves significantly over the time that I've been Chief Superintendent, and have brought them to a level that is a very slim margin for an organization our size with the possible expenses that we might face. Superintendent Grundy?
sorry, I'm going to keep going here. So would it be fair to describe the reserves as being maybe significantly depleted?
Chair Herdman to Trustee Bradshaw. They certainly, from my perspective, and again, I can be corrected by the actual accountants, we have brought reserves down to a very minimal level. There's often debate as to what is the appropriate amount of reserves. One common standard is up to 3%. Some have much greater than that in our school districts throughout Alberta. I doubt that very many have less than what we currently maintain, but again.
Chair Herdman through to Trustee Bradshaw. I believe in the recent operational review report, the government indicated that 3 to 5% is sort of their guidance. The average in the province is about 6.5%. Currently, we're sitting at about 1. I would also, perhaps as a point of information, just note that the administration and the previous board had a conversation about ensuring that the dollars we receive in a year are spent on the students in the system in a year, which precludes the accumulation of reserves. So all things being equal, yes, we have modest levels of reserves. Nothing in this system happens in a small way from a dollar perspective. It's a big system, so there can be big costs. So I'll leave it there.
And just a question for the mover. If we were to pass a motion like this, are we building sustainability into full-day kindergarten?
So that was a question of the mover. Yep. Do you wish to respond, or is that something that you would address during debate?
Yeah, that's something to address during debate, I think.
Trustee Adams?
Sorry, I'm just asking, if you can just refresh my memory from last week. I believe that in the budget assumptions report, there was also going to be a request for $2 million from reserves as well. Is that correct?
Chair Herdman through to Trustee Adams, the budget assumptions report did suggest that we would be seeking board approval for a withdrawal of $2.5 million from reserves.
So what would that then put us in? So that would, if we do the 2 million plus the 1 million, we'll call it 1 million, where would that put us at for our reserves?
Chair Herdman through to Trustee Adams. So recognizing that we have not yet finished this fiscal year, so there might be some movement, I would say if we took out an additional $1 million plus or minus a little bit, somewhere in the $9 million range on operating reserves, of course no impact on capital reserves. So we would be underneath 1%, but above the 0.5% that's currently referenced in the operational expectation.
Sorry, and just because I'm not that knowledgeable about such things. So what happens if we have another, because we talked about it a bit in the budget receptions report, saying if there is some massive weather, so let's say we have another big, huge snowstorm, and let's say a roof now needs to be replaced on a school. Like how much does, if something like that happens, how much does that cost? How much of that will be then taken from our reserves? I know it's kind of if, ands, and buts, but I'm just kind of curious as to, like if something major does happen to one of our schools, what would be the financial impact of that?
So Chair Herdman through to Trustee Adams, maybe I'll begin, and then if my colleague from facilities would like to respond. So that's probably not the best example simply because we would be insured. So any losses associated with a weather event, those kinds of things would be covered by insurance. But for example, if the federal government decided to allow in more refugees for some reason, and some of those folks came to Alberta, and the similar pattern unfolded, which saw the federal government and the provincial government not providing additional funding, those could be millions of dollars, probably not a full 9, but some portion thereof. As well, to mitigate the impact, we would be talking with Alberta Education, obviously yourselves, to do some advocacy work. So it's hard to say. Back to the conversation we had with the previous board around, let's focus on getting the dollars out into schools in the year we get it. If there are things that we feel we need to accumulate reserves to fund over time, so for example, the recent wireless upgrade across our system probably will hold us for somewhere around 5 years. At the conclusion of 5 years, we're looking at doing a similar type project again. There's a $15 million bill. We'll need to start building up some reserves over time to address that.
Chair Herdman to trustees, if I might just clarify as well, we have a criteria that we use every year to establish which schools will be the recipient of all-day, full-day kindergarten. Each year, the names of those schools can vary depending on the demographics of the schools and the money that's available. So there is no guarantee that the same 16 schools that got it for this current year would be the same schools that got it next year, regardless of this motion. The number of schools has also varied over the years, primarily dependent on the kind of dollars that are available to us.
Trustee Hare?
Yeah, just following up on the comments of the chief superintendent. The history of full-day kindergartens in Calgary Public, I believe, and I'm looking for help here, probably goes back to the mid-90s, but I'd like some information regarding that history. How many schools, shall we say, at our maximum we've ever had in that regard? Obviously, from what I've read, the educational literature is quite supportive of full-day kindergarten, especially for at-risk students. Anything along that line, just a little bit of an historical perspective.
Chair Herdman to Trustee Hare, I'll start and then Superintendent Everett may have more information. I have no direct knowledge in front of me as to how far back it goes. I know approximately 9 years ago, we had significant research to suggest that certain vulnerable populations, and more specifically, certain vulnerable students benefited from a full-day kindergarten. That in fact, the cost to the system to support our younger students in those circumstances ultimately ended up being less over their 12-year career with us. At the same time, we have also looked at how to support our young students beyond just that particular strategy. So other strategies have come into place to support our students. Some examples of that would be our new Aboriginal Learning Center. So other strategies have come in as well. There has always been that issue of lack of funding being provided for a full-day kindergarten, regardless of circumstances. And so the number of students that we could support has varied over those years. There is always a evaluation of the demographics of any particular school. We also faced an issue that we have resolved in that often it wasn't just the funding initially was for individual students, and that meant some students in that school would not have full day and some would be half day. That presented a significant number of issues for us as a system, for the families, for the schools, for the school administration. And so in fact, we have moved to a model where students who are in those schools receive that, and we don't distinguish between individual students. So the history has been quite varied, the number of schools has been quite varied, the number of dollars has been quite varied. What has never varied is the research that says there are benefits to some students for that particular kind of programming, and for the last 9 years we have always had some dollars that we put into that.
Chair Herdman to Trustee Hare. I have kind of data going back to 2012 at the height of our ILIDE, 2008. we had 27 schools receiving full-day K funding. To most recently, 2015-16, we actually had 15. So there's been quite a range every year dependent upon budget dollars allowed. As you know, full-day K is not funded.
Chair Herdman, to trustees, I would want to stress as well, it is also related to the overall amount of dollars we have. So we have an endless list of priorities in our system. One of our priorities is to try to keep class size at a reasonable level. We have struggled to do that, as has every district. So when we take away dollars for any particular initiative, it certainly benefits, but it also means we have fewer dollars to send out to the system as a whole. As I met with principals just the other day, their desire to keep other factors that support not only vulnerable students but all students was a key concern that we had this year. And so it isn't just an individual population. We have to look at all of the priorities that we have, and that's what we've tried to do in this particular case. They are never easy decisions, and they are never decisions that allow everybody to have everything that they deserve and require.
Just in doing my own sort of risk assessment, I'm just wondering, based on current projections, what are the risks that we will have a negative variance to budget this current school year?
Chair Herdman, at this point in time, still about halfway through, I'm not anticipating a negative variance. I'm actually expecting that we'll have a small positive variance. So I would see the risk of a negative one as being lower at this point in time.
And I know that the administration has been examining this issue as well, so I'm wondering if you can walk the board through the process that you use to come with this recommendation that you put in the budget assumptions report.
Chair Herdman, so certainly in the bar, on page 5.9, we, as superintendent, set out a criteria. And I think the two features of that criteria, as Chief Stevenson has said, was looking at minimizing the impact to K-12 students and schools overall, as well as ensuring programs are sustainable going into the future. So this is a year where those competing needs became even more evident. And this was one area where we have always had some fluctuation and in terms of the amount of dollars, budgeted dollars available. So where the budget rates or the student rate, we try to emphasize that, resulting in fewer dollars available for full day K. And again, looking at programs that are fully funded, this is not one of those. We also, however, have $1 million set aside for our most vulnerable schools. So our 10 schools that have the greatest vulnerability will still see full day K.
Trustee Hrdlicka?
Because one of the things that you always worry about is when you have something and you take it away, will you be able to get it again, right? And access again. So I'm wondering around, you said there are 27 schools in 2008 and 15 schools 2015, 16. So I'm just wondering, has it been very fluctuating in those years, or has been kind of a steady, particularly in the last 5 years, in regards to those programs?
So Chair Herdman to Trustee Hrdlicka, number of schools is interesting. What it really results in are necessarily numbers of classes required in individual schools. So there's a little bit of gray there. And we've always gone through the social economic status as a factor in considering this. And the schools that have typically been in that top 10 have been fairly stable. Last year, we did, however, add Mississippi, our Indigenous Early Learning Center, to that list. And so that is a new school to the top 10, I would say. But there's been some variation. Certainly English language learners, when there have been influxes, that has shifted the dynamic. But I would say within that top 10, there's been some stability.
Sorry, maybe I wasn't clear with my question. I was just wondering around those schools since 2008, started 27, and now we're looking to move to 10. I'm wondering if this has been like a downward move, because this is my concern. We have 16 now. We're going to take away 6. Are we going to be able to move back up to 16? I recognize that it depends on funding, but again, once you take something away, it's a lot harder to get it back. So I guess I'm wondering if it has been fluctuating, and we've one year been able to get 5 more schools, and then lost to the following year, and that's kind of what I'm looking for. If you have that information. Thanks, Jean.
So Chair Herdman to Trustee Herdlicka, I certainly take a risk of going into a political realm when I'm not a politician. We have asked for, as long as I can remember back, a long-term sustainable funding. We continue in this province to go, in essence, year by year. Certainly, this current government has made a commitment in terms of enrollment and has provided that sustainability and predictability based on enrollment. I'm not denying that. But it absolutely does depend on budget and the priorities that come before us each year. So it would be difficult to predict this one area of support, whether it would go up or whether it would go down. What we know is that as we receive feedback from teachers, from principals, from parents, from family, one of the biggest concerns is class size and the complexity of our classrooms. And as we looked at this particular budget, that was where we tried to have our highest priority while still looking after many, many, many numbers of vulnerable populations. And I don't think I'm going to go into each of those populations and the dollars that we put into there. So our ability to predict whether they would go up again, certainly. If the dollars become available and that need becomes a higher priority than other needs in the minds of superintendents and our feedback from our public, we could put more dollars in the future. I don't know if that helps you.
Trustees, any further questions? Okay, so we do have a motion on the floor. Is everyone clear as to what the motion is? Do you need it read aloud again? Trustee Herdlicka, could you read the amended motion out loud? I can read it for you, because our ladies have everything under control. That the Board of Trustees directs the Chief Superintendent to use reserves up to $1.2 million if needed to continue supporting full-day kindergarten in 16 schools for the 2018-2019 school year. Everyone clear on the motion? Any further questions? Trustee Herdlicka, would you like to open?
Okay, thank you, Chair. This is a really important issue, I would say, to every trustee and every person who is in this room. We know that we have difficult decisions to make at this board, and we're all feeling it in this budget. I think everyone is feeling and seeing what the impacts of this budget could be. In saying that, I think it is really, in a budget, there's no question that we have to look at the numbers and look what those numbers mean to our system and how they will impact our system. When it comes to our work and our priority around early intervention and getting to our kids early, especially those that need the supports that they need, we know, and the research says it, that those kids are going to have a better opportunity moving forward, not only for them, but for our system. So intervening with supports that often cost us as a system a lot of money down the road will also impact our budget and our work as a school system. The CBE had put out a project, the CBE Mild and Moderate Full Day Kindergarten Project in 2002, and we quoted in that report that it was concluded that developmentally appropriate full-day programs benefit children academically and socially, especially children from low socioeconomic or educationally disadvantaged backgrounds. Teachers preferred full day to half day. Parents reacted favorably to full day. Full day kindergarten may reduce the long-term costs for special and remedial education. We know that our students are a priority. And again, we have lots of priorities and competing priorities. But the learning of our students, our purpose is learning. And if we leave those children out, like Dana talked about today when she spoke at the mic, if we cut those programs, the learning to those most vulnerable kids, those kids in many cases, that this is one of their only chances of making it in regards to being successful in education. This is it, offering this program for them. Because they don't have, in some cases, the money to be able to access the supports and the education and the tutoring and all of those things that they need, because we have continually chipped away at public education and have taken it for granted. So they don't have that. And we need to remind ourselves how vulnerable these students are when they come to us. And so I really want us, as we go through this debate, I know there's so much to talk about in it, and this is so important for all of us, but just for me, and I think for all of us as we do the work, this is about students and how the system works to support them in their learning.
Thank you, Trustee Urlacher. Any other trustees for debate? Trustee Bradshaw?
So, I think Friday, we got a little bit of a lecture on something called the trolley problem. And I hate that it's like 5 days later, and I'm like bringing forward something that relates to that. It seems like we have, I guess with the trolley problem, you can make a kind of difficult decision, but not too difficult. And that will have maybe some effects that you're not seeing right away, or you can make a decision that will have an immediate effect and impacts you more directly. So with that, which is kind of terrible that we have to be in that position, but I guess that's public education. So I have an amendment that I'd like to bring forward. I don't think it's going to be friendly, so. But I really want to challenge the trustees with this. It's that the Board of Trustees direct the Chief Superintendent to find $1.2 million from the 2018-29 budget, exclusive of RAM funding, to be put towards 6 full-year kindergarten programs slated to be reduced to half day kindergarten.
You're supposed to provide things like that in writing to the board. Could you repeat that, please?
Sure. The Board of Trustees direct the Chief Superintendent to find $1.2 million from the 2018-2019 budget, exclusive of RAM funding, to be put towards 6 full-year kindergarten programs slated to be reduced to half-day kindergarten. So this would come right out of the budget instead of out of reserves.
Okay, perhaps, yes, that is a motion, but I'm thinking in order to amend her motion in an easier way, we just remove the words "to use reserves up to 1.2 million." So we could just say that the Board of Trustees directs the Chief Superintendent to continue supporting full-day kindergarten in 16 schools. And by not approving reserves, because the board is responsible for approving reserves, that means that they have to find it within their budget. So that's just an easier amendment to delete certain words from her original motion than to make a whole new essentially motion. Is that okay?
Yeah, it's kind of apple, or same thing, so whatever works.
So that the motion be amended to remove the words "to use reserves up to $1.2 million if needed." Did your motion ask for the same 16 schools this year or just 16 schools?
I guess it just said 16 schools, but if it's the same, I mean, they had a process to pick those 16 schools. I assume that's not changing, so.
So your motion does not want to say the same 16 schools. It's in keeping with Trustee Herdlicka's motion, just 16 schools in total.
Sure.
Okay. No, I don't think that's a friendly amendment. So we are now debating. So we are now debating the amendment to the motion. Trustees, do you have any questions on the amendment to the motion? Okay, Trustee Bradshaw, would you like to open debate on your amendment?
As I kind of alluded to, if we just keep taking from reserves for this stuff, and I feel like the reserves aren't meant to be, you know, kind of a slush fund for the trustees. As we're not building sustainability for a program like this. And I say that knowing full well that no one else is either. This hasn't been funded by the province. They might want it, but they're not willing to fund it. So this is coming from everywhere. And I also want the trustees, we don't have a lot of money left over. So I want the trustees to realize this is going to have a pretty strong impact on our service units if we're willing to go this way. And if you guys are willing to have those impacts and you feel full day kindergarten is that important on top of the impacts we're already adding from the budget assumptions report, then I guess that's something we would do. And I'll leave it up to you guys to kind of chat about this.
Trustees for round one? Trustee Herdlicka.
I guess my question is, if we're worried about service units, by pulling out of the budget right now, we're going to further impact service units. So we're already seeing the impact of that. By using reserves, it gives us some time, over a year. And as you mentioned, there's no other school board. All school boards are grappling with this. They're all dealing with this. And until we have a government that makes commitment to full day kindergarten and our most vulnerable students, this is where we're at. And I believe, so either way, pulling this out of our budget right now for this year, I think is questionable considering what's happened in the last, certainly this will be the second year of hits to our system. That's why we have reserves there. We have reserves to help support the system when we as trustees make decisions around what the system requires and needs. And not just trustees, but of course, everyone. But we get money from the government, and we have to be cognizant of that. That money also needs to be going into our work in the system. We have many boards that have very high reserves, and they just keep packing it away. I don't think that that is responsible of us as governors of a system for public education.
I have Trustee Hare and then Trustee Adams.
Point of information, historically, we of course cannot budget for a deficit, okay? Legally too, I guess, eh? The thing is that very often we do end up with somewhat of a surplus. My question is, when we end up with a surplus, where does that money go?
Chair Herdman, through to Trustee Hare, if we have a excess of revenue over expenses, a surplus, that would go into reserves.
So if we ended up in this next year having a $2 million surplus or a $1.2 million surplus, just pulling numbers out of the air, would that then go into reserve?
Chair Herdman, through to Trustee Hare, I don't think you have to worry about us having a $1.2 million surplus. We are currently, the budget was built on a $17 million deficit. As I indicated previously, I'm expecting a slight positive variance, which means that deficit will be a little bit less, but still a deficit, which means we're still drawing dollars out of our operating reserves for the 17-18 school year, leaving, I believe it's around $12 million available for the 18-19 school year, if that makes sense. So we're projecting a deficit for this year. We'll draw down our operating reserves to fund that. For next year, we were proposing to draw another 2.5 as we slowly work our way out of deficit financing and into a balanced situation. Adding $1 million to the reserve drawdown would sort of make that a little bit worse. If we don't, then we're looking at reduction somewhere else. But our reserve balance will still be somewhere in the $12 million range available for 18-19.
Trustee Adams?
Just a point of information. When you were talking earlier about the fluctuating numbers that have had full-day kindergarten, when you came up with 10 in the budget assumptions report, is that because you feel that we actually really need 10, or do you actually feel like we need 60, but you're cutting it because you needed to cut somewhere? I just kind of want to get an idea as where you're at with that.
Chair Herdman to Trustee Adam. The 10 were the schools with the lowest definable social economic status indicator that we have set out.
Trustees for first round of debate. Second round of debate on the amendment, just to be clear. Okay, I will enter debate. I think in a year where we're asking our service units to cut their budgets by 3 to 10%, that I am unwilling to, at this almost late point in the game, ask them to cut any further. They have already started all their budget planning processes. They're well into that work, and to ask them to relook at all of that, to try to find little bits here and there again, I'm not willing to support that motion. Any other Other trustees for second round? Trustee Davis?
Just a point of information, when you mentioned you're expecting a positive variance, meaning that the deficit could potentially be lower based upon the budget you're preparing for 2018-19, correct?
Chair Herdman through to Trustee Davis. I'm anticipating that we will end the current school year, 17-18, with a slightly smaller deficit than what we had forecast in the budget for 17-18, which means that that little bit of difference will fall into reserves and be available for 18-19.
Just a further point, because I thought I'd heard you say for the 18-19 budget, which you're working on, that you were expecting a positive variance when the question was raised about the risk for the next budget. So if you just clarify for the 18-19.
Yeah. So the question, as I heard it, was what is the risk in the current school year that we will see what I would call a negative variance, so a bigger deficit than what we planned for in the 17-18 budget. I think that risk is lower. I think the reality will likely be, and please don't quote me because lots of things can still happen, but I'm anticipating that we'll have a slightly smaller deficit than we budgeted for the current school year, 17-18, which means that the amount we have to draw out of reserves for 17-18 will be slightly lower, which means there's a slightly higher amount available for 18-19. So that's the sort of the timing issues we have to play with. So we're going to pass a budget for 18-19 before we actually know how 17-18 ends. So we're just working on forecasts and hoping that all of our plans are going to roll out as we think. Hope that helped.
So I appreciate the clarification. And I think as it relates to the amendment, I do appreciate the sentiment, but I also feel like the additional funds being requested would be to our advantage to take the next year to figure out how we may accommodate that. So I think at this time I would be struggling to support the amendment.
Any other trustees for a debate? Trustee Dennis?
I guess I would also struggle to support what Trustee Bradshaw is suggesting there. And I guess what struck me when we looked at the numbers and with these conversations is that in a $1.4 billion organization, we are budgeted so tight that we're actually talking about $1 million. When you look at the percentage that $1 million is of our entire budget, that to me, that really struck me in terms of how razor thin our budgets actually are. And so I'm not comfortable with, I guess, asking administration to go back and try and cut some more in a budget that's already as tight as it is.
Other trustees for second round? Trustee Bradshaw, would you like to close?
Sure would. So we got a budget assumptions report, and I'm assuming a lot of work went into this. Some difficult decisions were made. That's great. And now I guess we're coming back and questioning some of those decisions and trying to take more money out of the organization. I guess what my hope was that it's really easy for us as trustees to just get a budget assumption report. And it's got a few lines on there's going to be some cuts here and we can create some messaging around that. It's much more difficult for us to sit here and actually say, let's take money out of the organization. So when someone else is doing it, not so tough. When we have to, I guess maybe we shy away from it. So that was kind of where I was going with this. Yeah, I guess we'll head back, vote on this now.
See everyone frantically looking up the trolley car problem. Okay, can I call the question on the amendment? All those in favor? Trustee Bradshaw, all those opposed? Trustee Herdlicka, Hare, Davis, Adams, Dennis, and Herdman. So the amendment does not carry, so now we are back to the main motion, and we are still in first round of debate for the main motion. Any trustee wish to participate in first round of debate? Trustee Adams.
I guess for me, I struggle with this. I mean, cutting funding for full-day kindergarten is tough because these children obviously really need this, and it's obviously hugely needed, and so it's a great program. But I also struggle with the fact that our reserves are getting pretty low. So, and I feel that this is just a Band-Aid solution, throwing the 1.2. So what's going to happen next year when if it comes back to the table, or maybe our budget's even a little bit tighter next year, and we come back to it, are we going to keep adding to reserves to care and keep funding this? And I think that's where I struggle with this. So I really feel like we need a better long-term type of solution for it. I haven't made up my mind yet which way I'm going, because I'm interested to hear everyone's debate. But that is my struggle right now. So a part of me would like to almost put it back to administration for next year, maybe find maybe a better long-term solution for this, because I'm finding it hard to Band-Aid this problem. And I think that if we keep Band-Aiding problems, we're really going to run out of money. and then we have a whole new problem. So that's just kind of my initial thoughts.
Trustee Dennis?
So I would echo some of the statements that Trustee Adams has made. I also have not entirely made up my mind in terms of this motion, and even though I made a friendly amendment, I am interested to hear what others have to say as well. The sustainability question is huge for me, and I think I struggle with understanding that obviously full-day kindergarten has benefits. We know that it has benefits. What I'm struggling with is, we put it into schools without any guarantee of how long they're going to be able to keep it, and then we take it out of schools. And that's, some of the conversation that I've, had with some of our community is that, frustration around why give it to us if we can't keep it. And when we have it for such a short time and experience the benefit of it. And so I struggle with that, just the sustainability piece in terms of financially, but also then giving something and then taking it away from our communities. And so I wrestle with that too, and obviously very concerned about the amount of reserves that we have. We are the lowest in the province, and the lowest of, certainly significantly lower than the other metro boards. And so, to hear Chief Stevenson talk about, these unexpected events that occur, and the draw that we need to have money there to be able to address those concerns. And if we continue to draw down on reserves to do this, or to fund things that the province doesn't provide funding for, how responsible, I guess, are we being? So yeah, I just have questions about sustainability mostly, and just the impacts on our communities when we give them something and then take it away, and they're unsure whether or not they're going to have it from one year to the next.
Trustee Davis?
So I think, like everybody else around the table, I find these situation challenging. The reality is we've anticipated for some time that the provincial budget was not going to include any increases in funding rates, and that changes were going to be needed. And so as we move forward and look to how we maintain services, I think it's important that we evaluate all of our options, even though they may be out of the box. And so there are a number of third-party organizations who provide half-day kindergarten, either through a formal program or through high-quality childcare that provides that follows the program of studies. And these programs can access funding in different ways than we can, both through external funding and also through parents accessing government subsidies directly. And so in the last meeting, we were advised that no outreach had been done around that to date. And I think that given the current economic climate, it is my hope that we will start to look at some of those innovative ways to provide services to children, even if it means it's not by us. So while I share the concerns around reserves, I look at this motion as supporting this program for 1 year. And I would hope that as we move forward, we look at some unique and innovative ways to support this program. So I will be supporting the motion, but from my point of view, it's a transition year, and I really hope we take that time to determine how else we may access these kinds of services.
Trustee Hare?
I find the motion challenging, but I am not struggling with my decision. Certainly I'm not struggling today. Maybe a year from now I will, but not today. The motto of my high school was Lector et Emergo, which meant struggle and emerge. I think that passing this motion today will allow a number of our students to emerge and do well. And I think that's, that's what we're here for. This concern about reserves, yeah, I understand it. But today, we have 6 schools who we have the opportunity to give full-day kindergarten, which the research I am aware of states is a good thing, particularly for vulnerable youth. So I think, for those of us who may be more, concerned about finances, I can only tell you that I look at this as an expenditure. I do not look at this as an expenditure. I look at it as an investment. And I believe the school system will not only gain in the future from this investment, but also society. This is an investment in kids. This is what we're all about. So I will not struggle when I raise my hand in support of this motion.
Other trustees for first round? It's just me, okay. So I will get to do what our debating students don't get to do. I will argue for and against this motion. So I will start this round of debate against the motion. So recently I was reading the final Auditor General's final commentary, it was called, as he is leaving his position soon. And he made the comment that he wished he could have done this at the beginning of his tenure. And it was all about sustainability and looking towards the future, and that we can't just think about right now. We need to really be thinking about the future and our future generations. And he says that for politicians, that's really hard. He specifically talked about the political reality, that it's really hard for politicians when they have to think about election cycles and when they have to deal with angry constituents that want something right now, to really have that long-term perspective. But he said how critical it was. I know that when our administration was making these decisions, that they explored all the same things that we're talking about. They know, probably better than us, all the benefits of full-day kindergarten. They know how much it can impact students, and I'm sure that this decision was not made lightly. And it does speak, as Trustee Dennis said, to how tight our budget is, that something that represents 0.1% of our budget that we know is so important for some students that we are contemplating removing from some schools. However, we also know that future budgets are very uncertain. We heard that from our chief superintendent. We know there's an election next year. So while this government has committed to funding growth, and they have, we have no idea what next year will hold. Our province is in still a very tight financial shape. We have a long way to go before we can achieve a balanced budget provincially, and I'm not sure that future budgets will be as supportive of education even as they are now. So that's something that we also have to keep in mind. And ultimately, at the end of the day, the province does not fund full-day kindergarten. It was something that was in the government platform, but that they did not consider a high enough priority amongst all their other priorities to fund even for the most vulnerable students. So it's something that we have done as a school system because we recognize the benefits of this program. However, the province does not fund it. It's not part of our core mandate. And every business book that you read tells you when your budgets are tight, when you're facing challenging times, what you do, you really look at what that core mandate is and really focus on that. And it has to become priorities because these are all tough choices. We're always choosing between good and good or great and great. We're not choosing between good and bad. I mean, these are priorities that our system has to make. And while we may have a positive variance to our budget, we're still anticipating that 2.5 million. And I'm hoping that hopefully we'll have a 2.5 million positive to variance, and then we can be working on a balanced budget for next year. That's really what our ultimate goal is. Reserves are supposed to be for one-time projects. They are not supposed to be for ongoing operational reserves. And I'm over my time. And as chair, I'm cutting myself off. I'm sorry. Does any trustee wish to participate in second round? Trustee Bradshaw.
So this one's kind of weird for me. During the election, we had forums, and someone asked about full-day kindergarten at a forum. And I got up and I said, yeah, I think it's a great idea. It's a great program. It's not good for every student, but in areas it works. And then every single candidate after me, except for one, disagreed with me. And I got raked across the coal by parents after. They were coming up to me saying, I really like what you had to say, but not about full-day kindergarten. They were so mad. So it's kind of weird. And I still support full-day kindergarten. That said, this one's tough. I don't think every time we have a hard decision, we can keep relying on our reserves to get us out of those hard decisions. And I'm a little bit disappointed when it was a hard decision and we had to put our names behind something that we chose not to. So I don't want to cut this program. I think when you guys put together, just as Chair Herdman said, the budget assumptions report, this was maybe the least worst of a whole bunch of bad options. And I have to respect that, the effort that went into that, and I know it wasn't easy for you guys, and I don't think this decision's easy for us either.
Other trustees for second round? Okay, now I will debate for the motion. And we'll see if I can stay in time this time. So we have heard comments around why would we ever offer a program if it can't be sustained. We heard that a lot when we were making transportation decisions last year. Why did you ever offer us these transportation services if now you're just going to take it away from us? And my response was always, you know what, we do the best with what we have. We obviously don't have control over our funding, over how much we get every year, and we do the best with what we have. And sometimes we do have programs that, yes, might not be sustained. But is that a reason not to offer that to these 6 schools next year? We know that I was just on Calgary Catholic's website and I saw that they're offering the program in 10 of their schools this year in their most high needs area. And that surprised me because in 2015, they actually made headlines, and that's rare, for cutting full-day kindergarten because they had received a grant for full-day kindergarten and the government discontinued the grant. And so they said, well, the government's not funding it anymore, we're cutting it out of our schools. And then this year, they're reinstating it without any additional provincial funding for that. And so I don't know exactly the reasons why they're doing it, but I think it does go to show how difficult this decision is and how much full-day kindergarten does benefit school systems. I mean, as we've heard, there's overwhelming research on the benefits of early learning and how that investment pays off, but it might not necessarily pay off financially, and that's the problem. If we could honestly say, if we invest this in kindergarten, then we'll save this amount of money in grade 3 to 9, then yes, that would be an easy decision. But sometimes those decisions aren't, those benefits aren't financial. For our at-risk students, we use the words at risk for a reason. They are at risk of not completing high school. And we know that all children aren't born, we call it the lottery of life. Which family a child is born into. And school is supposed to be the great equalizer. Our public education system is supposed to be the great equalizer, and we all know it's not. I mean, research shows a lot of test scores, university, post-secondary entrances, a lot still depends on the family that you were born into and your life circumstances. It would be wonderful to say that hard work always gets you a certain outcome, but we know that that's not the case. And equity is still something that we must push towards as a society and as a public school system. Because ultimately, what benefits these students benefits our society. And while the province doesn't fund full-day kindergarten, I'd say full-day kindergarten completely aligns with our values of students come first. Learning is our central purpose. Public education serves the common good, and that is what we are supposed to be making our decisions around. Oh, and I went over by 20 seconds, I'm sorry. Are there any other trustees for second round of debate? Trustee Herdlicka, would you like to close?
I think since this board has been elected, this was kind of the heaviest conversation that we've had. And I appreciate having the conversation. I really value that opportunity to talk about our students and what matters. And I appreciate the work of our staff in giving us the information and having the dialogue with us on this. I would echo what Trustee Hare said. This to some might be a difficult decision. For me, this isn't a difficult decision. Our students, again, they're why we're here. And one of our jobs as trustee, or one of the things that happens as you're a trustee, is all sorts of things start flying at you. And they start hitting you and coming at you, and things are in your face all the time. And sometimes we get distracted from what's really important. And our students are what's important. I do appreciate the comments about moving forward. You know, we as trustees, as we look at our own priorities, how does this fall under that? What are the things that we want to see around full-day kindergarten, and have that dialogue around with administration? I think that makes a lot of sense. I would say looking at the privatization of kindergarten in our public schools is not something that I am particularly interested in, but I think having dialogue about these kind of things is really important. So I think I appreciate the dialogue today. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about this. And more than anything, I appreciate that all of you, I know how much you value our students, and please just consider that when we make this vote.
Thank you. So can I call the question? All trustees in favor? And that is trustees Hrdlicka, Hare, Davis, Adams, Dennis, and Herdman. Opposed? Trustee Bradshaw, and the motion carries. I believe that brings us to the consent portion of our agenda. And as there were, oh, I'm sorry, was there another motion you wanted to make? Yes.
So this motion is that the Board of Trustees send a letter to the Minister of Education to request the government invest $2.1 million to provide full-day kindergarten for 16 CBE schools in the 2018-2019 school year.
Trustees, any questions regarding the motion?
Is 2.1 enough money to be able to provide full-day kindergarten for the 16 schools?
Chair Herdman to Trustee Dennis. So that's a great question. Every year we look at the actual students that arrive and we don't know till they show up. So there may be a bit of a variance there, but right now I would say based on our projections, perhaps. But again, it's never that definitive. It varies based on the number of classes required in any one school. So it's not necessarily about the number of schools. It will be about the number of classes within each school.
Trustees, any further questions? Trustee Hrdlicka, would you like to open debate?
So we've already had this great discussion about full-day kindergarten and the importance of it. When it comes to early learning, and I believe just like public education, it is a fundamental right for a child to have access to the learning that they need. And that is a responsibility of our government to provide that. This government has made a commitment, had made a commitment before they were elected to invest in full-day kindergarten. And so this letter to me is another encouraging gesture for them to follow through with a commitment that they made 3 years ago. So I think it's, and as trustees, to keep this dialogue going and make it a priority for the government as we talked about moving forward. How are we going to address this moving forward? This is one step in that direction of advocating on behalf of full-day kindergarten.
Trustee Bradshaw.
Remind me not to take any of you guys when I go to buy a car. If we'd have put this motion first, I probably would have supported it. But we just voted to fund this. I can't see why we'd send a letter to the minister asking him to fund it now after we just did. So can't support this.
Any other trustees for debate? Trustee Hare?
I appreciate the comments of the previous speaker. On the other hand, I think this board has just stood up for kids. We've taken a vote and we've saying that these vulnerable children are in need of our assistance. They're in need of education. They're in need of full-day kindergarten. And we've put our stick in the sand, and now we're sort of asking very gently that the provincial government, which as Trustee Herdlicka previously mentioned, had it in their election platform. And we're going to remind them. And I have absolutely no problem with this motion.
Any other trustees for first round? Second round? Well, I would agree with comments made by Trustee Hare that this is something that this government has stood for, that has advocated for years, even before they became government, that full-day kindergarten, especially for at-risk students, is something that is of benefit to our society. And while I'm not extremely hopeful that our letter will be, that we will be able to access funds as a result of this letter, I do think it is important to remind them that this is something that they considered a priority, and that in the absence of their funding it, we have done it. But that this is not a sustainable thing. Using reserves is not a sustainable way of funding full-day kindergarten. And that ultimately, if we want this program to be sustainable, that it does need to be funded from the provincial government. Are there any other trustees for second round? Trustee Dennis?
I think the decision that we made to ensure that we are continuing to offer full-day kindergarten in these schools has demonstrated our commitment to the learning of our students. And I feel like we were put in a difficult position of having to do that. I'm a little concerned about, the risk that we put ourselves in around depleting our reserves any further. But I do think it certainly should send a message to the province to say we've made this a priority, that full-day kindergarten matters for our students. And I think it's fair for us to ask the province to also demonstrate their commitment to that as well.
Any other trustees for second round? Trustee Herdlicka, would you like to close? Okay, can I call a question? All those in favor? And that's trustees Herdlicka, Hare, Davis, Adams, Dennis, and Herdman. Those opposed? Trustee Bradshaw, and the motion carries. Are there any other further motions? Okay. So that does bring us to the consent agenda of our meeting, and as no items were pulled for consent, all items are deemed to be approved with the agenda. So the board has 3 land, 3 labor, and 2 governance matters to deal with in camera following the public portion of this meeting. So this brings us to the conclusion of this portion of the agenda, and I would like to thank all of you who joined us. Our next public board meeting is scheduled for next Tuesday, May 15th, 2018.